Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Open Access Advocates Weigh In on the Democratization of Academic Journals. My name is Danielle Padula. I head up Community Development at Scholastica, and I'll be moderating today's panel. Today's webinar is a follow-up to Scholastica's recent white paper, Democratizing Academic Journals, Technology, Services, and Open Access, which explores how centralization of journals among corporate publishers led to the serials crisis and argues that democratizing journal publishing is the key to making open access sustainable in the future. 5 fantastic contributors helped us develop that paper by sharing their knowledge of the journal publishing landscape and open access movement. During today's webinar, 3 of those contributors will discuss their individual thoughts on the topics covered in the white paper. We have the following white paper contributors joining us as panelists today. Stephen Harnard, professor in the Department of Psychology at Université du Québec à Montreal, and he's a prominent green open access advocate. Roxanne Missingham, Chief Scholarly Information Officer at Australian National University and Deputy Chair of the Australian Open Access Support Group. And Dan Morgan, Digital Science Publisher at University of California Press. We also want to acknowledge Ulrich Erb, Open Access expert at Saarland University and State Library, and Bjorn Brems, Professor of Neurogenetics at the University of Regensburg. Both of them contributed to the white paper but are unable to join us today, so we just want to thank them for their contributions. So before we get started, I wanted to make sure everyone in the audience knows how to participate in today's webinar. We hope you will. Everyone's welcome to submit questions for the panelists via Twitter using the hashtag #SustainableOA, and we'll be fielding those questions at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, let's get started. To kick off the conversation, I wanted to ask the panelists how you feel about the current state of open access journal publishing. For that, Dan, I'll start with you and then open the question to the group. I'm wondering, do you think today's open access publishing practices are sustainable? Why or why not? What do you think is working, and where do you see issues that are holding us back?
Well, I mean, I could start, in so many areas, but so I'll, just to remain focused, I'll kick off with kind of the notion of centralized budgets and the budgetary support for open access. I mean, obviously, open access is happening. I mean, we've seen the growth of publishers like PLOS, and obviously the phenomenal growth and now slight decline of PLOS ONE. So, there are budgets and there are institutional and organizational budgets to support open access publishing. But having kind of recently entered the open access publishing landscape myself with the Collabora program at UC Press recently, I can definitely report that the APC, the article processing charge, which is obviously called just one of the ways that people can support gold open access publishing, it's not really well suited to scale. It's kind of this very fiddly and fussy micropayment per article, and it really is kind of waiting for someone to come, or people to come up with better ways of centralizing this kind of budget and expenditure. And of course, that's already happening. There's various membership programs with publishers and things kind of trying to happen at global, or at national scales or kind of regional scales. But I think the sustainability, the long-term sustainability, and the ease and efficiency of open access will be very much improved by kind of the centralization and the coordination of budgets, which kind of essentially do exist. But that money has just got to find its way kind of in the most efficient way possible to those people offering publishing services in the open access environment. And of course, and you mentioned the serials crisis. I mean, I feel like, this has been said a lot. There is money in the system. There's budget in the system, and a whole lot of money is spent on publishing per se on an annual basis. So there is money there. And so what I think a lot of the kind of things like OA 2020, and a lot of people are trying to get the money that already exists in the system and utilize it a bit better, including a transition to open access. So the coordination of budgets and the creation of budgets and the creation of centralized ways, I think, would be a huge step forward in the sustainability of open access. But there's many more, but I'll leave it there.
Sure, absolutely. Stephen, Roxanne, do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It's a good intro for me to comment on what Don said. Sustainability is the reason that I am opposed to a pre-green gold open access. Gold open access means you pay the publisher to publish. Green open access means it doesn't say anything about payment. It simply says that you take the article wherever you're publishing it and you make it free online in addition to whatever else you're doing with it. And my own view is that you can't get sustainable gold open access until you have universal green open access. Because many of the things that Don mentioned, for example, the money in the system. The fact is that there's money in the system, but way too much money. And Dan mentioned that it's to pay for. Don mentioned that it's to pay for services. Well, it's to pay for way too many services that are no longer needed. From my point of view, and it's a long-standing point of view. I've had the same point of view for 2 decades, and things seemed like they were moving in the right direction, and then they got derooted. And I'll explain if anybody asks why they got derooted. But this premature gold open access that is now being equated with open access itself. We're thinking of gold open access journals where the author institution pays as being what we mean by open access. The result of this has been that the prices are locked in, predatory journals were born, and green open access is stalled. So I think it's gone all wrong. I don't think this is a matter of micropayments. I certainly don't think membership is a solution for it. I don't think there's need for any centralization. And there's one key word that expresses the core of this. There is only one essential service that former refereed, peer-reviewed journal publishers still offer today, and that is peer review management. That's it. That's the only service that needs to be paid for. It's not micropayment. You pay for it by paper. As it's submitted, there's a price for having it. The peers review for free, but the publisher manages it and has an editor who picks the referees and judges whether the revisions have been made. That costs something, not much, about $200 a paper. That has to be, excuse me, yes, $200 per paper, but not $200 per accepted paper, where all of the rejected papers, peer reviews are wrapped into the price of the accepted paper. It's about $200 for the price of managing the peer review process, whether you win or lose. It's a no-fault service. That's the only service. And centralizing that as a membership is completely incoherent.
So are you saying you think that really the issue is a lot of publishing, the way that publishing is being approached is kind of adding too much expense? I know that in the white paper, we talked a lot about the fact that, and something a lot of people say is many corporate publishers are approaching publishing kind of similarly to the way that print publishing was handled. And arguably, it's being handled in a less efficient manner as a result. We're trying to kind of accommodate these print publishing practices. It's not really the best way to publish in the digital landscape, but for some reason, it seems that that is happening a lot more, and also still kind of just trying to keep the print journal alive, as opposed to kind of the really ultra extreme things like archive overlay journals like Discrete Analysis or Quantum, where they're actually just posting it on a preprint. They're just worrying about their peer review process and not making publishing an expensive operation, not dealing with kind of all the components of publishing.
That's more or less it, but you can't go into that straight away either. That is the way things will work once green open access has forced out all of the obsolete products and services and forced it to go online and free. Now, offering a service that's already what it'll be after green open access had prevailed, namely just a peer review service and a hosting, it won't capture the market. I mean, it's why should people do that? The status quo is that the top journals, even the middle journals, are there. Their heels are locked in there. They've got embargoes on open access, on green open access, and authors need to publish in those journals. They don't want to go to, you have no idea what you're getting, especially now with the new generation of predatory journals, where open access journals are even getting a bad reputation. They shouldn't be, but they're getting it because there are journalists coming in who are not doing any kind of peer review at all, charging for it, giving you a quick publication, and then nothing. So it's all premature, even though it's been 20 years. What needs to be promoted, in my view, and promoted with complete vigor, is green open access. Once you have 100% green open access, the journals can be canceled because it's all up there for free, and they'll be forced to downsize to the solution that Scholastica is going to prematurely now.
Yeah, that's an interesting approach. Certainly green open access is, the cheapest solution to start with, for sure. And it's interesting too, I know you're getting at kind of the idea of journal brands as well. We recently did an interview with Stuart Taylor, Director of Journals at the Royal Society, and he really hit on all of those points. Really interesting interview, just talking about kind of this loop of this vicious cycle we get into with current journal impact metrics. Roxanne, I want to turn to you. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this.
So I guess I'd support what Stephen's saying. I think what we've got to stop doing is trying to move the deck chairs around on the Titanic and have lots of people doing little things with gold open access, and as Dan said, spending a heck of a lot of resources that could be put into research. We're really committed in my institution to green open access, and that means exploring tools. And I think one of the things we need to bear in mind as well is we are where we are because of financially and on copyright sense, because of printers, not of publishing, in Britain in the 17th century that reconstructed for revenue purposes rather than for communication purposes. And I think we need to apply a scholarly communication lens and absolutely go green, but do it in different ways, not just paying our traditional publishers, but by actually being willing to experiment with researchers and come up with new models, including new models of university support. I mean, University of California has been a leader in that space, as have we. And I think we need to continue to be very experimental in getting scholarly resources to a wide community without putting a paywall intervention in, even a paywall intervention of gold.
Sure, absolutely. And kind of related to what you're saying, getting into action steps, we talk a lot about the issues threatening research access in the white paper, and many people are weighing in on that topic via other outlets as well. Today, I wanted to devote some time to discussing different solutions to make open access sustainable. And Stephen, turning it back to you, I know you believe that universal green open access is that solution. Do you have thoughts on what needs to be done to make that approach, realized? Why is it that we don't have everybody archiving their papers and making sure that either pre or post publication that their paper is going to their repository? Do you think that it's an education piece that people need to understand how to do it? Is it the embargo blockers? What are your thoughts on kind of how to get that part of open access moving? And certainly that's something that can really work alongside other models being tested, because as we say, green open access costs nothing. So how can we kind of push that forward?
Well, that's the Zen koan of the decade. Why isn't it happening? In fact, it's the Zen koan of 2 decades. The answer, I think, if I knew exactly what it was and what to do about it, I'd do it. But I think the answer is author timidity and publisher sort of territoriality. Authors' main concern is getting published in the top journal in their field, and not putting anything connected with that at jeopardy. Well, publishers have been playing loosely with the idea of open access. They've been saying we're not opposed to open access, but in order to keep ourselves in business during the transition period, we're going to embargo green open access for a year. Well, let me tell you, which has effectively made a 1-year delay the baseline for everything. As long as there's a 1-year delay, green open access can't prevail, and for exactly the reasons that publishers are embargoing. Because while you have that 1-year delay, you can't cancel the journals, and until you cancel the journals, you can't force the publishers to downsize to the post-green essentials. They're going to still keep on doing stuff and charging for stuff that we don't need. That's the obstacle. Timidity and territory. Well, I just needed a T word, but it's basically trying to protect the revenue sources. As Don said, there's a lot of money exchanging hands in the system. It's mostly to pay for subscriptions. And as long as your career is locked in the publication in a high quality journal, and that's a subscription journal with an embargo, you're afraid to make it green open access. Let me tell you quickly, I'm not afraid, and physicists are not afraid. And in fact, a good 40% of the scholarly and scientific community is simply ignoring the embargoes, as they should have done all along. They simply take their final referee draft and they put it in their repository. But 60% aren't.
Sure. Yeah, no, that is definitely a big challenge. And do you think that, Roxanne, I'm wondering what your thoughts are. Do you think that researchers have, don't understand that they are able to put out their work into repositories? Is there a way to deal with these embargoes, from a library standpoint? I know that Stuart had mentioned in England there was a motion that had happened to make it where universities could set it up where they would have a contract that any of their work would be able to be put into a repository, and then from there it would kind of protect their researchers. I'm not remembering the name of that right now, but I'm wondering if that, what your thoughts are on that.
So I think we've reached a situation where it's become extraordinarily complex, and I've got to say, having looked at some of the contracts authors sign, and even I sign as an author, they can be completely incomprehensible. I think the whole concept, I'd really like to see us think about from, if you like, birth of an article, how we can bring things forward to the wider community. And I think the whole development with archive and the new preprint repositories this year are a really interesting way of changing the landscape. Lots of times as a community, librarians and scholars are very nervous about preprints, but as Stephen has pointed out, some community have made a real difference, and I'd add astronomers and economists to the list. And I think we need to create some new innovative spaces. And sometimes I wonder whether the whole bureaucratic infrastructure around repositories needs to be thought through in a different way, so that we're not using very expensive resources to fiddle-faddle around and put different versions in different places, but to look for a much longer solution that's collaborative, that can be more well-structured and connected both to the lives of researchers and to the workflow of scholarly communications.
Sure, absolutely. Experimenting with different types of repositories is an interesting approach for sure. And just to follow up, the license I was referring to is the UK Scholarly Communications license that Stuart had mentioned, and that was proposed by Imperial College London. He said it's a bit like the Harvard license from 2008. That would make it where if institutions sign up, their researchers grant the university a non-exclusive worldwide license to the accepted manuscript version of an article that they produce. So that's kind of an interesting opportunity as well, that be interesting to see if it happens in other parts of the world as well. And I did want to pivot a little bit and question kind of that impact piece as well, and that kind of branding piece that has proven to be challenging. Dan, I'm wondering what your thoughts are. Is there anything happening now that seems to be really promising in terms of researchers starting to look at journals beyond the brand sort of, and also really at the university and funder level? Because of course, as long as, grants are being based on bibliometric impact indicators and kind of those old traditional, checks of quality of research, that's going to be an issue. Do you have any thoughts on kind of where that landscape is going?
Yeah, I mean, well, I've been delighted by the progress. I mean, we're still not very far along, but I've been delighted by the progress, primarily most publicly made by funders, where they make it very clear that they don't really care where you publish your work as long as it's freely available, and available in an open access format. So I think that's, however much that's being adhered to or not adhered to, or whether they've gone hard enough or too hard on that, I think I'm seeing a lot more conversations where people are at least acknowledging in a public way that a piece of work its merit is inherent in it as a piece of work, not where it just happened to get published, right? So, and in addition to that, I'm very interested in the notion of the increased interest in preprints, or whatever we should end up calling them, in other fields beyond the, your classic astronomy, physics, economics, and some social sciences. I work very much in the psychology field, and there's a lot of kind of increase in the use of preprints in that field. And I can see, people just realizing, and they tend to be very community oriented rather than publisher or kind of commercial entity oriented kind of exercises. So, I am seeing kind of progress in a lot of these areas. So where, and to just classify that, where there's an inherent kind of retaining of ownership of an object, an author has written a paper and they say, well, this is still my thing, and I think you should establish what you think of it based on this thing that I put in front of you, and it doesn't make any difference whether, a high editorial curation journal happens to kind of publish it. So, I mean, I think that's, some of the things I'm seeing that I'm pleased by, a general sense of more ownership of the academic community. And, and I feel like, as, publishing is essentially, it should be considered, the act of publishing should be considered, or should have been retained as an activity that the academy or the research community needed, right? But then, of course, it became a thing, and then publishers started to dictate terms and dictated the behavior of the academy and research community somewhat. And so I'm just now speaking the grander way of putting it, I'm kind of enjoying seeing the research community and the academy starting to kind of dictate terms forward a little bit more. Again, I don't feel like it's happening quickly enough for my liking. It's just whatever we can do to keep kind of enabling that. I mean, and as a publisher, it's sometimes like awkward to be in the publishing community and kind of have a lot of these thoughts, because on the one hand, like many of the end point of my thoughts would essentially, almost like Stephen says, minimize or reduce the need for someone like me or an organization for that I work for. But I, as an individual, I mean, I can't speak on behalf of any group of publishers or even the end publisher that I work for. I'm fairly comfortable with that, because I feel like publishers or people that are interested in publishing do work at the, should think of themselves as offering services to the people that need it. And I feel like, yeah, in Stephen's end game, and I feel like Stephen and I want the same things, but we just happen to believe in different routes. I feel like we will get to that point, and I'm comfortable getting to that point even as a publisher, where publishers put the needs of the academy first and publishers second, and exist, genuinely and literally as a mission to, serve the academy and serve the research community. Absolutely. And the idea of publishing coming back within the academy, the way that at UCP you guys are doing that with Collabora right now. I know in the paper, you and Bjorn both expressed the benefits of being able to replace that corporate publisher relationship, which used to be so sort of necessary in the print time. Everybody didn't have access to the ability to print journals. It was kind of an onerous thing to do. But now with everything digital, there is the idea of using different tools and different services to be able to in-house that publishing operation within the actual nonprofit academic publisher. And I know that you've been able to do that. I was wondering what your thoughts are on that experience. And I know Bjorn has really stressed too just the importance of retaining copyright within the academy and not having, corporate contracts where copyright is lost, because that, just sort of starts this whole issue of not having a lot of leverage in terms of pricing on the academic side. Right. Well, I mean, and I could almost continue a point that Stephen was making as well. I guess I wouldn't put it in the same way as you do, Stephen, in the sense that there's this absolute reductionist approach to services. I think you just have to stop presuming services, but authors, I mean, I would never want to tell an author, oh, you don't need that service, right? And I when I speak to authors, I feel like, some authors literally think publishers still do things that they haven't done for like 10 years, 10 years or more, outside of the softer social sciences and the humanities, the notion of or top tier medical and science journals, the glamour journals, the notion of manuscript development or true copy editing, for example, there's been absence from science and social science publishing for 10 years. I mean, with most publishers. And, you know, and again, that was probably because it was regarded as, well, authors aren't necessarily asking for that very strongly. But I know that there are some authors, and this is not just some sort of, oh, I spoke to one person and they said this very strongly, so I'm going to increase it to more people. But it's, you know, I'm speaking to communities of authors in various fields that are just like, we wish publishers would do more. Not what you're actually doing right now, but kind of other things like helping me with my figures or helping me with my manuscript presentation, things like that. It's more common in book publishing for sure, you know, the notion of instructional design. So, you know, and I'm not saying that just to try and think of new revenue streams for publishers or anything like that, but what, and this is going back to a point I made in the white paper, I see kind of reductions in costs and more efficiency in things like typesetting or even reducing the need for traditional typesetting as not just ways to minimize expenditure on publishing, but opening up other potential things that you can do if authors want. So that's the thing, not imposing anything that authors don't want, but not just thinking in terms of reducing, increasing the efficiency by reducing the cost, but being able to offer more things that perhaps were always appreciated by some people, and maybe those some people would still want them.
Sure, absolutely. I know one thing that comes to mind is the idea of tracking analytics of papers, being able to look at, you know, kind of metrics beyond citations, which I know is becoming important to a lot of authors. Roxanne, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this.
So I guess I should say, I think publishers do provide many important services, and I do see some great innovation happening, particularly in the digital space. And we need to support much more creative outputs. I mean, at ANU, I'm also responsible for the press, and we are primarily social science and humanities. And I see huge potential in areas like linguistics, in areas like music and the arts to do really new forms of publication, and also to increase community engagement as a part of that publication. But I think we really need to think of quite alternative funding models that are co-produced or research grant and actually research focused around scholarly communication, and sort of break that traditional model with a whole variety of experimentation.
I definitely agree, and I feel like it's interesting how a lot of people want there to be more innovative digital presentation of things, and people say, oh, I wish we could do that. And the answer to so many of these requests is that you actually already can, just authors aren't doing that. You know, like, actually it's a weird moment in a lot of scientific publishing, you know, the ability to have, like, even, you know, I'm talking about basic things that are regarded as basic innovation now, like video and articles and stuff. That was possible long before it became commonplace, because, you know, the possibility of publishing video came before most people knew how to shoot a video on their phone and, you know, and could use basic editing software on their computers. So I do think that, yeah, I'm very interested in getting to a space where authors think more creatively about what they can present as their work. And I think an interim period, they will need help with that, because a lot of these things are possible. And you see these amazing standalone digital humanities projects, which a group of authors manages to get their head around and do this amazing work, but it just doesn't iterate. It's not taking place in, you know, consistently and continuously. And so it was so I wanted to jump on that point, because I think it's a good illustration of what I meant by being able to offer more services, not just to be able to control more. I think the role of publishers is to facilitate, not control. But I think in the facilitation of innovative and creative presentation of work is a role that publishers could do more of. And I think they will be able to do more of if they can spend less time, money, and effort, you know, sending things to get typeset in super traditional ways that you could automate or even not need to do at this point.
Sure, absolutely. And I know a theme in the white paper was really sort of the importance of the academic community, and that's looking at all the stakeholders, whether it be university presses or library publishers and so forth, being able to develop and support multiple open access models. Kind of speaking to what you're saying, being able to support different ways of publishing based on disciplinary needs or, you know, the needs of different researchers. How do you think this could be facilitated more? you know, do you think that there's things that need to be happening to facilitate more models than kind of the traditional model we have now? And I know, Roxanne, you had talked about that a bit, so I'm wondering what your thoughts are.
So I think probably there's a couple of different approaches to this. One that we've seen great, I think, success of is handing more power back to the scholarly authors, letting them be involved with support staff in terms of the creativity and creating new partnership models that are about exploration of content management, of content creativity, but also about different funding options. I think one of the big challenges for not so much the large, well-established scholars, but certainly for the scholarly societies, is how do they fit in this new environment? And one of the things that strikes me, having been president of the Library Association as well and seeing their journal evolve, is that the money that they rely on from traditional commercial, well, now traditional commercial online processes is in fact a remarkably small amount of money. And if we actually had some new models, then we would actually enable scholarly societies and authors to be liberated from some of the approaches that have been taken. And I guess I look at things like the How Journal, which is an open access journal, and we actually volunteer a subscription to that because it's a very important humanities journal, and we feel it takes scholarship to the next level. So it's very important to our academics and for us to support that in a different way. And I think letting, to a degree, 1,000 flowers bloom may not mean 1,000 flowers continue, but it means that we're actually learning by doing, which is important in terms of this space.
And do you think that there's, you know, things that can kind of encourage societies to start to try to return publishing in-house? I mean, I know the library publishing movement is really kind of showing that that's possible, like you're saying, and it's true, looking in the white paper too with research, the amount of money that societies get from their journals isn't always really that much from those contracts. So what do you think needs to happen for that sort of re-insourcing of publishing into the academic community to start to occur? And I'll just throw that out to the group. I'm wondering who has thoughts on that.
I mean, I have thoughts on it, but in a way, my thought is, yeah, some societies don't make a lot of money from their journals, but there's a lot of societies that do. So I don't think there is a kind of one answer to it. I mean, it is one of the things that might hold back a very mission-driven organization from engaging in a type of publishing that predicates, you know, well, seems to only be financially viable over quantity rather than quality. You know, that is the problem. You know, the society can market themselves as having the best content, but in the OA sphere, it's less easy to sell that, you know, for a higher price than if you're, you know, charging for the services that are, you know, being applied to these journals. So I don't know. I mean, these are the tough questions about any kind of engagement with open access practices, which takes me back to my very, you know, initial point, is that there is money in this system. How can we make it work better? I appreciate there's too much money, and I appreciate, you know, not all of it is used particularly well at all. So I'm not saying it all needs to be reutilized better, or I'm not suggesting that any of the paradigms necessarily deserve to continue. I mean, each one has to reestablish itself. But, you know, right now, I don't have any good answers to how you can help mission-driven societies retain what they want to do when they are clearly benefiting from a subscription product.
Sure.
That doesn't mean we don't stop trying. That doesn't mean we stop trying.
Yeah, absolutely. Stephen, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on all of this. Do you think that, I know that you're, you know, advocating for green open access to start. Do you think that societies now, you know, starting to get more involved in publishing would be a benefit, or perhaps at least everybody just educating about the importance of making your research open access in some form? What are your thoughts on the role of societies and publishers? Sorry, go ahead.
Do you really want to hear my thoughts?
Yes.
We do, Stephen. We want to hear your thoughts.
All right, then I'll tell you my thoughts. I've got reactions to a lot of the stuff that has been said until now, but let me say by way of preamble, there's a reason why I don't do these things anymore. I made an exception for you, Danielle. I'm not sure why, but I've pulled back from this because it's the same old thing over and over. I made a provisional principle that until something new comes up, I'm not going back into the fray. I'm tired of saying the same things over and over in response to the same things over and over. And they're coming up here again. All this is about new ways, new services, alternate repositories. All of this stuff has been mooted and waited for, and nothing's happened. We are at the 40% level, and we're treading water. So let me just quickly go. You'll see where I last tuned in from what I'm going to reply. You talked about lots of different kinds of repositories, archive-like repositories, etc. That's been the theme for 25 years. The archive authors, the astronomers, the physicists, and the economists have been doing it steadily since the beginning. You're preaching to the converted when you come to them, and it's not repositories that authors need. I mean, they needed repositories, but it's not this kind of repository, that kind of repository. They need to move their fingers. Whatever repository they're putting it into, they've got to deposit, and they're not doing it. The problem is not the kind of repository. It's also not the kind of license, because the Harvard Imperial license is there, authors sign it, but nothing happens. We're still at 40% because it's not being invoked. If it were really true that an institution says all of the published work of my researchers is still, the copyright is still mine, and I can make it open access immediately, then they'd be doing it. They don't. They're living in embargoes with or without that agreement. So that's just words. So alternative repositories are just words as well. Metrics are not relevant. Metrics are not relevant. We know that authors want to publish in the highest quality journal in their area, and they hope that it'll maximize their citations. That's what it's about. It's wrong. It's misleading to say funders don't care. They can say in their instructions that it's not the impact factor of the journal that you publish in that matters to us. Funders are not the ones who are doing the peer reviewing. It's peers. Peers review for the funders, and they judge your research by whether it gets into the high quality journal or not. So this is all nonsense that we say to sort of soothe ourselves with the 40% that we keep on staring at. It does matter where it was published, and it matters because the journals with the track record for quality have a monopoly on the research still. The newcomers, as I say, you can publish in a know-nothing journal and say, my funder doesn't care about my impact. You're not going to get your grant. You're not going to get your promotion. They care about which journal you publish in, and it's not the impact factor they care about, it's the track record for quality. It's correlated with the impact factor. Also, circulating preprints that's a foregone conclusion. People are circulating electronically their papers before they're refereed and published. That changes nothing. We're talking about refereed research, not unrefereed preprints. And as for dictating, the only way to dictate this and make sure the publishers downsize to the essentials is for institutions and their funders to mandate that their authors deposit their final refereed drafts immediately upon acceptance for publication. The UK is the closest to that now, and we'll find out in 2 years or not whether they've driven the percentage up from higher than 40%, because as a prerequisite for being eligible for the research assessment, the research, I forget what they're calling it.
Evaluation framework.
Pardon me?
REF, the research evaluation.
REF, or whatever they're calling it. In order to be eligible for that, you have to have deposited your paper, and that's for an entire 6-year interval. You have to have deposited your paper within 3 months of acceptance for publication. So if that works, that may turn things around for the UK. I rather doubt it, because the UK is completely ambivalent about this, because at the same time that HEFCE is requiring that, the funding research councils are going along with the ridiculous Finch report, and they're saying that they prefer that you publish it now in a gold open access journal. Well, please, saints preserve us. And then as for offering services, let's distinguish journals from books. We're not talking about books here. I'm not talking about books. I'm talking about referee journals. They need no other service than peer review. If you want an extra copy editing service, pay extra for it. But all they really need to free up the literature is peer review. And societies have to figure out some other way to keep themselves afloat than by subsidizing their good works with the lost access and impact of their authors.
Sure. Yeah, no, the idea of societies having to consider different business models is interesting, because as long as there's sort of this relationship where societies are depending on these brand journals, as you're saying, that is highly problematic. Dan, do you have thoughts on this? I'm wondering, I do wonder if I understand what you're saying, Stephen, that it seems that the brands will always stay in place, but with different
don't forget that I gave a formula for wresting this from their fingers by green open access mandates. It won't stay with them until they're forced to downsize by the fact that nobody is subscribing anymore, because it's all available by green open access.
Sure, absolutely. And do you think, I'm wondering then, in that sort of green open access landscape, you know, getting there, hopefully it is, as you're saying, the challenge of getting people to do it. But do you see that brands start to then go away a little bit, or not matter as much if everything?
No, not at all. Brands, I hate this word branding over here. The quality, let's talk about quality. The quality of the journal depends on the quality of its authorship. And the established journals have a grip on the quality authors. If the quality authors migrate to other journals, that's fine, but that's what everybody's been waiting for the last 20 years, that other better journals, somehow better in some other way than by the quality, or at least track record for quality standards, are going to attract the authors. It hasn't happened. It's not happening. Green open access is not happening, and a migration of the high quality authors from the high quality journals to new journals is not happening.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's challenging to see. We need movement, more movement in some direction for sure, and that is the challenge right now. But we do see examples of journals like Lingua, which is interesting, that journal that you know, left Elsevier, their board, to start Glossa, and kind of the idea of those established editors starting a journal of their own and bringing that sort of reputation with them. Similarly, Discrete Analysis, Fields medalist Timothy Gowers starting a journal of his own, putting his reputation with it, and getting really prominent articles to be published. The solution to the ergos discrepancy problem, really impressive stuff. I'm wondering, Dan or Roxanne, what are your thoughts on that, of those more established researchers starting to put their reputation behind quality open access journals that are not run by publishers? And certainly Collabora is really an example of a journal that has established people behind it and is going to kind of use the reputation of the press and of the editors to hopefully encourage authors to want to go to that publication. Dan, I'll throw it to you. I'm wondering what your thoughts are.
Well, reputation is leveraged in one way or another, like with any kind of journal aiming to be more than just a predatory journal, right? And in some cases, especially with, the Lingua to Glossa transfer, I mean, those editors whom I know, I was not involved in it, but I know a lot of the players particularly well. They just believed that they didn't want to stay in this one journal, and they decided to go alone to launch another journal. But they still went with a publisher. I mean, Ubiquity Press and the Open Library of the Humanities, they're not traditional publishers, perhaps, but they're still going to a publisher, and they are trying to create reputations for themselves. So, I guess I probably don't see that kind of transition as controversial as it can sometimes be made out to be when people write it up. I mean, I think, a journal leaving any publisher to go and kind of do it a little bit more, down and dirty by themselves, or with, a startup publisher, or leaving to, a journal, just an editorial deciding we're going to stop doing this and start something else. I mean, that's the story in itself. I'm not sure whether it would be more of a story if the original journal stopped, if Lingua literally stopped existing, but Lingua continues to this day. It's got a brand new editorial board, sits on Science Direct, seemingly not having any problem publishing papers. So that's not to say I like it when this happens, because it's just fun to watch. I'm interested in the whys and wherefores people do all these things. And I think the systems that we've got in place, such as Scholastica, such as Ubiquity Press, such as a great deal of more engagement by people in these kinds of systems, enables this thing to happen a bit more. So perhaps, yeah, it enables a more mission-driven approach to publishing. It enables you to require less capital up front to get it started. It enables you to experiment with ideas and, do things mainly on voluntary labor a lot more. So I support that. I support the labors of love that journals are. I mean, whether or not we like the word brand, whatever. I mean, a single figure we could make all of this better by mandating a more efficient system. I mean, we're dealing with an irrational market, So yes, everything would be great if everything was green open access, but we're already seeing that it's just extremely hard to get to that point. So I think humans will self-organize into groups, and you can call them brands, you can call them tribes, you can call them clubs, and these are words I'm using that open access advocates and people that write about this have already used. But, people will organize into groups, and that's ultimately what then creates a journal. Like, this group is different to that group, just as someone believes that the Journal of Cognitive Psychology or the Cognitive Psychology Journal, they're two separate journals. I've just made them up. To the outside world, they're both journals about cognitive psychology, but that group believes their scope stands for something different to that group. And, it's the human, self-regard that makes these brands occur. And yes, some of them get higher statuses and some of them get lower statuses. But I've learned the hard way that I can't predict nor control any of this stuff. So I just have to facilitate that which the research community and academics want to do. And I can try and do it in the most kind of mission-driven and efficient way possible.
Sure, absolutely. And it is interesting that you say, kind of the idea of making it not seem so crazy to think that academics, could start journals by themselves, could create their own sort of, as you're saying, whether you call it a brand or a tribe or, whatever, creating their own sort of journal movement. It is interesting to see if we start to have more examples of that and sort of more of that mission behind it, how much we could achieve. Because we see journals popping up now, and it's not really that hard to do, and there's not as many pieces and expenses needed as a lot of people, on sort of the traditional side seem to think are necessary. So it is going to be interesting to see how the future landscape shapes out. And certainly, Stephen, absolutely, green open access is a huge part of it, and really just getting researchers to take the initiative to, do that, to make sure that their papers are available. Green open access is such a big piece to that picture as well. So we are about at time here, actually. So I'm gonna just check and see if we have any questions on Twitter. I think we've been a little quiet over here. But I will say to viewers, because we are also going to be making this available as recording, if you do have a question after the fact of the webinar or thoughts to share, please do feel free to use that hashtag #SustainableOA to get some ideas out there. But we do see one Twitter viewer here, Chris Mines, she's saying it's true that there's way too much money going into journals and unnecessary sort of publishing practices. So it's interesting, I think there's a lot of people who echo that sentiment as well. So in closing, I just wanted to thank everybody for joining us for the webinar today. Thank you to all of our guest speakers. This has been a really great discussion. And we hope that this webinar will broaden awareness of the issues at hand. Certainly there are complicated issues to be solved. And really just hope to inspire positive change in how the scholarly community approaches open access. As I said, we will be emailing the recording of this webinar to all of the registrants. We invite anybody to continue the discussion on Twitter with that hashtag #SustainableOA. And if you're interested in more resources, webinars on different academic topics, you can also check out scholasticahq.com/resources. We have other discussions that are available if you're interested on topics pertaining to academic publishing. We hope to continue to do many more. So thank you guys all again so much for taking the time to do this. Greatly appreciated. And to everybody out there viewing, have a great rest of the day. Bye, everybody.